Shalom, everyone. I'm Josiah Geoffrey.
I'm Hosea Geoffrey.
Welcome to Solid Scripture, where the whole discussion is totally by the book. Today, we're continuing our Bible reading through the book of Joshua. Today's portion is Joshua 7:1 through 8:35. We've already read the passage ahead of time, but if you'd like to read it as well, why don't you go and pause the video and do that, and then we'll go ahead and get into discussing.
In this portion, Israel follows up their victory against Jericho by attempting to capture the Canaanite city of Ai. But when the sin of one Israeli brings disaster upon the whole people, Joshua must act decisively to purge the evil, turn away God's wrath, and lead Israel to victory.
So this portion begins after the people of Israel have successfully conquered the city of Jericho and razed it to the ground. And we read that, unfortunately, one Jew named Achan has kept some of the plunder of the city of Jericho, even though Joshua had said that all of it was supposed to be destroyed. So if you remember from the last episode on Joshua, we had read that the entire city of Jericho, except for Rahab and her family, were under the ban or devoted to destruction because of how wicked the city was. And so Joshua had said, no one can take anything from the city. It all needs to be completely destroyed. And he had specifically said, don't covet any of the things in the city. But this guy, Achan, figures that he could just flout that, I guess, and he's taking some of that plunder for himself and hiding it in his tent. Now, what's really interesting is that the way this chapter starts out is by saying, but the sons of Israel acted unfaithfully in regard to the things under the ban. For Achan, the son of Carmi, took some of the things under the ban. Therefore, the anger of Adonai burned against the sons of Israel. So the reason why I find that interesting is because it specifically says the sons of Israel did a bad thing because Achan did a bad thing. And then God was angry at the sons of Israel because of what Achan had done. So what just one guy had done made God angry against the entire people of Israel. We had read back in the Torah that God had set apart the people of Israel to be his holy nation, his kingdom of priests, his treasured possession. Basically, Israel as a people needed to be really holy and set apart from evil things so that they could be close to God. And God himself had his tabernacle and his presence in the camp of Israel. And so God told the people of Israel that they needed to be really clean, really holy, so that God could be in the midst of them. And so what we're seeing here is that even if one Israeli is being evil in the midst of the entire assembly of Israel, then that will turn God's anger against the whole people of Israel. That is how strict God is with his people and how dangerous it is to be God's people. And so I think that this shows exactly what God was talking about in Jeremiah 31 when he promised that he would make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Because in that new covenant, he promises that they will all know me from the least of them to the greatest of them, and they will be my people and I will be their God. So the new covenant is not like the covenant that God made with Israel through Moses, where they're super duper strict regulations, and if they deviate from that at all, God will bring his judgment on the people. The new covenant promises that essentially they won't deviate from that, and so they won't get that judgment. And so they will all know him. The entire people of Israel will know God. As Paul says in Romans 11, all Israel will be saved. So this kind of thing here where one Israeli is bringing judgment on the whole nation, once the people of Israel accept Yeshua's sacrifice and enter into the new covenant as was prophesied, this will never happen again, and Israel will faithfully walk according to God's word.
So while Achan has taken some of the spoil from the city of Jericho and kept it even though it was forbidden, he kept it hidden from all the other people. So no one knew that Achan had sinned or that God was angry with the people of Israel. And so not knowing this, Joshua sends men to the city of Ai to prepare for the first assault against the city. And so the men go up and they spy out the city and they come back to Joshua and they say, this is easy. We don't even need to send everybody. Just send like 3,000 guys. That'll be enough to capture this city because there's only a few of them.
Little did they know.
And so Joshua thinks this is great, and he sends 3,000 guys to conquer the city of Ai. But it turns out that it's not going to be that simple, because they end up fleeing before the men of Ai. It says the men of Ai killed about 36 of their men and chased them before the gate, and the hearts of the people melted and became as water. So just shortly before, in the last video, we saw that the people of Israel had been able to defeat the city of Jericho with their massive wall because God was fighting for them. And so he worked a miracle and gave them complete victory over their enemies. But now, when they expected to have easy victory over an enemy who was weaker than them, they ended up getting defeated and ended up with some of them getting killed. And of course, the reason for this is because God is angry with the people of Israel because of Achan's sin. But the people of Israel didn't know that, and so they fought a battle without God fighting with them. This reminds me of what Moses had warned them in the book of Deuteronomy. And if you faithfully obey the voice of Adonai your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, Adonai will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. But if you will not obey the voice of Adonai your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, Adonai will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them. So it really doesn't matter what the size of the army is that Israel is facing. What matters is whether or not they are following God, obeying him, and keeping all his commands. Because if they are, then it doesn't matter how big the army is, they will have victory. And if they aren't, it doesn't matter how small the army is, they will be defeated. And so as soon as the people of Israel suffer this defeat, as it said, the hearts of the people melted. They immediately became afraid and were worried that they wouldn't be able to conquer the land of Canaan at all. And this even applies to Joshua. It says that Joshua and the elders tore their clothes and fell on their face before the ark of Adonai. And Joshua said, "O Adonai Elohim, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all to give us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan. O Adonai, what can I say when Israel has turned their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it and will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do for your great name?" So Joshua is expressing doubt and regret that they came across the Jordan to receive the promised land. That is crazy considering all that Joshua has seen the people of Israel go through. He was there when they left Egypt. He is one of the last people who has seen all of this stuff. And he was with Moses all the way.
And he was one of the 2 faithful spies who spied out the land the first time. And he saw when God said, you can't enter the promised land, when the people of Israel were too afraid to enter because they thought that the Canaanites will kill us all. So Joshua knows that God has given this land, and God gets angry when they say, well, we don't want to possess it.
But despite Joshua having seen all this and having been faithful to God throughout it all, he is now in some amount of doubt because the people of Israel have been defeated. And he doesn't know of any reason why they would be defeated. It seems like God has just abandoned them. And kind of he has, for as long as they're in this sin. Joshua's response to God here actually reminds me of a response Moses had to God when he was sent to redeem the people of Israel from Egypt. Because after he approached Pharaoh, Pharaoh said, "I will not let the people go," and he made their burdens harder, and the people of Israel came to Moses and blamed him, and they said, "You've given Pharaoh a sword to slay us." And Moses said to Adonai, "O Adonai, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me?" So Joshua here is expressing the same sentiment as Moses. When things start to go wrong, he questions his mission. He says, what am I doing wrong? Should I even be here? Should we even be doing this now? It's all going so wrong. But when Moses had made that question to God, why am I even here? Why do I have this mission? God had responded with, his promises and saying, I'm going to fulfill the covenant that I swore. And so Joshua, even though he makes a similar lament to what Moses had said, Joshua still seems to remember that reply and remember that God has those promises, because then he appeals to God and says, look, if things keep going this way, the Canaanites are going to cut us off and remove our name. So what are you going to do for your great name? So he's calling on God, remember your promises and act for them, please.
And so after Joshua has complained to God and basically expressed, they're going to kill us all and we have no hope. God, what are you going to do even? God responds to Joshua, rise up. Why is it that you have fallen on your face? Israel has sinned and they have also transgressed my covenant. Therefore, the sons of Israel cannot stand before their enemies. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy the things under the ban from your midst. And God gives Joshua instructions for how to find the guy who has taken some of the plunder from Jericho and kept it for himself. So when Joshua is there basically complaining and saying, God, you've abandoned us. What are we going to do? We shouldn't have even come to the promised land at all. We should have stayed over on the other side of the Jordan. God's saying, what are you even talking about? Obviously, Israel has sinned. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. And so God's saying to Joshua, you shouldn't be lying here complaining and doubting. You should be taking action to make things right. Things are wrong, so make things right. Figure out how to get back on track and get Israel back to following my word, and then I will be with you. We had read back in the first chapter of Joshua that God had said the very famous phrase to Joshua, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And we had read how that had come right after God had told Joshua, be remaining in the Torah, read the book of the Torah, meditate on it day and night, and do whatever it says. And then you can be strong and courageous because I will be with you. And so what we're seeing here is that Joshua should understand that if God was not with him, then the whole reason is because they weren't walking in accordance with the Torah. Because God had promised, if you are following the Torah, then I will be with you and defeat all your enemies. So God doesn't break his side of the promise. So obviously Israel was at fault, and Joshua should know this, and he should do what is necessary to make it right.
And I find it worth noting that when God is now giving instructions to Joshua and explaining the situation, he says to him, Israel has sinned. They have transgressed my covenant that I commanded them. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen and lied and put them among their own belongings. They turn their backs before their enemies because they have become devoted for destruction. I will be with you no more unless you destroy the devoted things from among you. Moses had warned the people of Israel that if they brought any devoted things into their house, then they would also become devoted to destruction, that is. Because one of the people of Israel brought in a thing that was under the ban, devoted for destruction, he also became devoted. And so when God is saying to Joshua, you have to destroy all the devoted things from Israel, that includes that man. And again, as Josiah noted before, even though it was one man who sinned and who brought in the things that were devoted for destruction and became devoted for destruction, yet God is attributing this to the whole people of Israel because they have a thing devoted for destruction in their midst. And if you have that in your midst, you are devoted for destruction. And so this indicates the danger that Israel is in. And no wonder they're being attacked by their enemies, because they are being destroyed, because what is within them needs to be destroyed one way or another.
So after God has finished explaining to Joshua that Israel's been in sin, and he gives Joshua the way to figure out who's the one who brought Israel into sin, the next day Joshua does it, and he assembles all of Israel to find the guy who brought the banned thing into Israel. So basically, Joshua has the entire people of Israel assembled, and then they cast lots or something, and God ends up choosing the tribe of Judah. It's like the guy who took it is in Judah. And then they take Judah, and then they try to figure out which clan of Judah it's in. And then they figure out which household in Judah it is. And then in that household, they find which guy it is, and what do you know? It comes up that it's Achan, who's the guy that God says, that's the guy. And so Joshua goes up to Achan and says, Achan, come on, what did you do? And so it's at this point that Achan says, you're right, I did sin against God. While we were plundering Jericho, I saw a cloak and some silver and some gold, and I coveted it, so I stole it. And then I went and I buried it in my tent. And so Joshua sends some guys and they go and dig it up and they find the stuff. And so it's at that point that Joshua has to do what God told him to do, which is to execute Achan, to take all that he has and burn it. So he takes Achan and his sons and daughters and his donkeys and all his animals and everything that he has, and he stones them, he buries them in rubble, and they are executed. And it's at that point that God turns away his anger from Israel. He's like, you guys did good now, and I'm not angry with you because you purged the evil from among you.
So there's multiple things here that I want to point out. The first of which is that obviously you cannot hide your sin from God. Nobody saw Achan take the things that were devoted for destruction. Only he knew, and God knew. And so even though the people of Israel were deceived and didn't know the sin and actually fell into judgment because of it, God knew the whole time, and God was able to guide Joshua directly to the man who had sinned. In the entirety of a community of 600,000 men, not including women and children, there was one man bringing judgment on the whole people. And God knew exactly who it was. Narrowed it down from a field of all those people down to one person alone, exposed with nothing but himself and the consequences of his sin. And then when Achan is exposed, he has no choice but to confess. And so when he does confess, he says that the reason he sinned is because he saw the spoil and he coveted it. And so I think it's worth noting that Achan's sin was made possible by the amount of spoil that was available, and because they had had victory over the city of Jericho. The people of Israel's victory, because they had been following God, is what presented the opportunity to go astray and cease following God and meet defeat. So I think this should caution us to realize that we are never above stumbling. We can't think that we did good and then we're good to go, because the prosperity and protection which comes from following God can actually open the door to further temptation. So we need to make sure we are never proud, we are never complacent with respect to our ability to fall into sin.
This reminds me of what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. He recounts how God had judged the people of Israel specifically during the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness when they sinned. And Paul says, and these things happened to those people as patterns, and they were written for our warning, so that he who is thinking he will be able to stand, let him watch out, so that he may not fall. So in the same way that the people of Israel stumbled and fell in their sin, in the same way, all of us can fall. We have that potential. We're still human beings, and human beings are bad. But if we are trusting in God and following his ways, then we won't fall. We just need to be vigilant. We need to watch out, as Paul says, so that we won't fall. We need to not be so high-minded and prideful to think that, oh, I'll make it no matter what, I'm good. And Paul actually goes on to say, no way of testing has taken hold of you except that which is human, and God, who will not allow you to be tempted above what you are able, is faithful. And with the way of testing, he will also make the way out for your being able to bear it. So Paul is just emphasizing that if you do stumble in your sin, that's on you. God's not going to put a temptation in front of you that is so irresistible that there is no possible way you as a human can resist it. Rather, whenever you're tempted, God will always provide a way out. And so you need to always be watchful, be vigilant, and take that way when God presents it. Don't walk in the covetousness of your sin. Don't walk in your fleshly desires. Instead, seek God, don't be prideful, and always follow God's way out of temptation. And then the other thing about this is that when Achan took the items that were under the ban or devoted to destruction or whatever, when he took those into his own tent, he ended up sealing his own fate as someone devoted to destruction. And he ended up getting executed. And the way that he was executed was he and all of his family, his animals, everything were completely killed, and his possessions were burned and everything. And that honestly sounds a lot like what the people of Israel did to Jericho itself. The entire city of Jericho was under the ban of destruction. And when Achan took something out of Jericho and brought it into his own tent, he put himself under that same ban. And basically, he took the judgment of Jericho and brought it into his own house and brought it upon his own head. There's a verse that we talked about back when we read the book of Deuteronomy, which says, "You shall not bring an abomination into your house and like it come under the ban. You shall utterly detest it, and you shall utterly abhor it, for it is something banned." So what Achan did here was he brought an abomination into his house, and like it, he came under the ban. And so this is just a reminder that when the wickedness of the world is out there, that is not something that we should desire, and it is definitely not something that we should bring back into our own hearts, our own homes, our own minds, our actions, anything. If we bring the wickedness of the world into our lives, then we are bringing the judgment of the world into our lives. And we will end up falling with the wicked. So don't be like Achan and don't covet the things of the world. Don't lust after the world. Stand firm on what God has given you and find the things of the world repulsive. Hate them, detest them, don't bring them into your house, don't bring them close, push it away, stay pure, stay clean, stay holy, and set apart from the world, so that way you won't bring the judgment of the world on yourself.
So after Achan's evil has been purged from the people of Israel, God's relationship with Israel is restored. And he promises to Joshua, "I'm going to give you victory over the people of Ai. Do not fear and do not be dismayed." And he tells Joshua that unlike when they captured the city of Jericho, when they conquer the city of Ai, they will be able to keep the spoil for themselves. So the instruction to not keep the spoil was a one-time thing for Jericho. And yet it only took that one time to find the evildoer in Israel and purge him. And so I do want to point out that God only gave that command once, but it was enough to reveal the person who would violate it. This reminds me of what Paul says in Romans 7. "What then will we say? That the Torah is sin? Let it not be. Rather, I did not know the sin except through Torah. Indeed, I also would not have known what the covetousness was if the Torah had not said, 'You must not covet.' But the sin, having received an opportunity through the command, brought about all covetousness in me. Therefore, the Torah indeed is holy, and the command is holy and righteous and good. But the sin, so that it might be shown to be sin, through the good was bringing about death to me, so that the sin might become exceedingly sinful through the command." So what Paul is saying is that when a command is given, that gives us the opportunity to sin against it. When the people of Israel capture the city of Ai, they're allowed to take the spoil. And so they won't be coveting something they're not allowed to have, and it won't be sin. But in the case of Jericho, God gave that command, "Do not take the spoil." And as soon as that command was given, that paved the way for Achan's covetousness to be revealed and to become exceedingly sinful. If he had coveted the spoil that was permitted, that wouldn't have been so much of a problem. But he coveted the spoil that was not permitted, and so he took it and became devoted to destruction. His sin was revealed and able to be purged through the command that was given. God knows how to reveal the sin in our hearts, and he does it through his commands. So wherever we're falling short in his commands, that is an opportunity to examine ourselves and to realize what the commands are showing about our hearts, what sins are being revealed and given opportunity through the commands, that we can then bring those sins to God for him to totally destroy them because they are devoted for destruction and they have no place in our lives.
And so once God tells Joshua, You can capture the city of Ai. You're going to win this time. You can even take spoil. He then tells Joshua how to capture the city of Ai. And he says that he should take all the people of war up against Ai. So we had read previously that Joshua had been like, oh, this is going to be easy, and he'd only set 3 guys. And not 3 guys, 3,000 guys. That would be a little bit ridiculous. Joshua had been like, oh, this will be easy, and he'd only sent 3. I just almost did it again. 3,000 guys. But here, God is saying, send all your guys. And so Joshua actually sends 30,000, so 10 times more to capture this city. And God also tells them to set up an ambush for the city. So God is not only telling Joshua how many guys to take, but he's also telling him how to go about capturing the city. Very similarly to what he did with Jericho, where he told them to march around the walls and then they came down. In the same way, here God is telling Joshua his strategy, telling him how many guys to take, telling him everything. And so right here, we're seeing again that when Israel is doing stuff on their own strength and making their own plans, that's not going to work so well, especially if you have sin in your midst. But when you go to God and let God dictate your plans through his word, and if you're listening to his spirit, that will be the way that you can make sure your plans are going to succeed, is if you're following God's plans and not your own. And so we see here that what Joshua does is he follows God's commands. He takes all 30,000 of his guys and he sets 5,000 of the guys behind the city waiting in ambush. And so then Joshua leads the rest of the men to pretend like they're doing a frontal assault on the city and then draw out the soldiers of the city of Ai out of the city to attack Joshua. And then Joshua and his men pretend that they're being defeated and they run away like, oh no, they're defeating us. And once they've taken the soldiers far enough away from the city, he gives the signal and the 5,000 guys in ambush, they seize the city. They take it and start burning it. And then the soldiers of Ai, they look back and they see smoke going up from their city and they're like, oh boy. And then Joshua's like, charge! And he leads his guys to attack the soldiers who they were just fleeing from. And then the soldiers who had stayed behind and took the city, they come out of the city, and so they sort of do a pincer maneuver. And so the soldiers of Ai are surrounded on both sides by Israeli soldiers, and it's just a bloodbath, and all the soldiers of Ai are completely decimated, and Israel takes the city just like God had commanded them, and just like God had promised they would be able to. And so with all of the soldiers of Ai having been defeated, and with the entire city having been decimated and burned and razed to the ground, and all the inhabitants dead, the only guy left is the king of Ai. And so he's brought to Joshua alive, and then he's publicly executed by Joshua hanging him on a tree. And then it says that he was only hanged until evening, and then they took his body down, which according to the Torah, God had commanded the people of Israel, if you hang someone, you need to take him down, because curses everyone who's hung on a tree, and you don't want to bring that curse on Israel. So Joshua is even following the Torah in the way that he's executing this king of this Canaanite city.
And then the last thing that we read in this chapter is that Joshua proceeded to build an altar on Mount Ebal, the place where Moses had specifically instructed him to build an altar and make a memorial and perform a ceremony to remind the people of God's Torah. It says that Joshua makes the altar of uncut stones that no one's ever put a tool on, just as Moses had commanded them to build all their altars. And as Moses commanded, Joshua put up a huge monument writing the whole Torah down on stones set up on Mount Ebal. Also, as Moses had commanded, the whole people stand one half on Mount Ebal and one half across on Mount Gerizim to receive the blessing and the curse. And Joshua then proceeds to read the entire Torah that Moses had commanded in the hearing of the whole people of Israel. So Joshua is making very sure they're in the land, they're beginning the conquest, and he's making sure that they're grounded in Torah, which is exactly what Moses had told them to make sure that they do, so that they don't go astray to the right or to the left. Because we've already seen what happens when they go astray, and we've seen what happens when they stand firm in God's word. And so Joshua is making sure that they do everything they can to stay on the right track, to remain in God's promises and his commands, and move forward to victory. And so the main takeaway from this portion is that sin brings destruction to everything that it touches, but God stands with those who are purified. The sin of the city of Jericho had put everyone in it and everything they had under a ban of destruction. But because Achan decided that he wanted the spoil of that city, he took it with him. He brought the destruction of that sin into his own house. And having been contaminated by that sin and by that destruction, he brought sin and destruction upon himself. And because he was in the midst of the people of Israel, it brought sin and destruction upon the people of Israel. The only solution for this was for the people of Israel to be purified. The people of Israel had to be clean before God, and in order to do that, they had to purge the evil from their midst. This meant absolutely destroying not only Achan, but all that he had, his family, everything that pertained to him in any way had to be destroyed. This is the cost of purity and holiness, being willing to destroy anything in our lives that jeopardizes that purity, that brings sin and brings destruction with that sin. It is better to destroy the sinful influences in our lives than to be influenced by the sin and ourselves be destroyed. But if we are purified, if we come to the Master such that he takes away our sin and makes us white as snow, then we are clean before God and he stands with us. He gives us victory. He enables us with his word to accomplish all that he has planned. And so we have confidence so as not to fear nor to be dismayed as long as we are being pure. We are coming to God so he reveals our sin through his commands, and then he enables us to destroy that sin, completely take it captive, and leave no survivors. Because when we do that, he is with us and we will have victory.
That wraps up this episode of Solid Scripture. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions for us to answer or ideas for future videos, we'd love to hear from you down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to keep updated on new videos. And if you would, please consider sending us a donation to help us make more videos like these. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week. God bless.